everybody, and welcome back to Writing the Rapids. I am your host, Joe Bielecki, and this is the show where I talk to writers about writing. Very often, those writers have been recommended to me by writers who have previously been on the show, or it's a Rejoinder episode, which this is. Shane Jesse Christmas returns to talk about his new book through Filthy Loot called METH-DTF. We recently had him on to talk about Belfie Hell, Xerox Over Manhattan. He has another book out through Amphetamine Sulfate Press called The Sex Shops of Sherman Oaks. All relevant links will, of course, be in the show notes. Before we get into my conversation with Shane, I'll remind you that you can help out the show in a variety of ways. You can subscribe to my Patreon at patreon.com/noisemakerjoe. For a measly $2 a month, you can get these episodes as soon as I'm done editing them, rather than a couple days later. You can also throw me a one-time donation at paypal.me/noisemakerjoe, or you can buy my book. It's called Tired. It's on Amazon. I'd also encourage you to rate the show wherever you listen to it. You can also go on social media and tell people that you liked the episode, post a link to the episode, and encourage other people to listen. That helps me out a whole lot. Now, without further ado, let's get into my conversation with Shane. Well, let's start with this. I think I shied away from asking about it when we had you on before. But obviously you're not American. But a lot of your books seem to sort of take place in America or an America-like place. And I know that you've spent time here. Mm-hmm. But I'm sort of curious why that is.
I think there's a couple of reasons. So, mainly from I think we did touch on it a little bit last time, but I think mainly from a point of view of, you need to be sort of entertained yourself as the writer while you're writing, and I think to sort of entertain myself, whether it's the flow of actually getting on a bit of a tear in the writing, and then also in terms of if I have to look something up to sort of research and make sure something is good, then that's interesting for me in the process of actually writing. I think if I was sort of writing about, if you're saying like METH-DTF is suddenly written in a city here, I just don't think I'd be captured myself by my enthusiasm to write the story, I guess. But I was also thinking about this recently, that a while ago, if you talk about it, I think about a city as a whole, as a sort of entity or a living sort of character in a novel that, some people do probably more than I do, and they sort of talk about it a bit more like at a higher level, that cities are characters in a novel or something like that. A while ago, or not a while ago, when I first started writing, I think I sort of had this idea of how cities are sort of portrayed in science fiction and in some sort of crime novels as well, just this as a character, and I sort of did. It seems a bit weird now, but at the time I was just like, the city can be anything, because there's some sort of transferable essences of cities if you're thinking of cities as a character. So I was just calling the places that I was writing about, like the city, or and it just came across a little bit wonky and didn't really fit. So I just sort of went, well, I'll just want to place it in these places that I have visited and spent some time at. And if you're talking about transferable essences of cities, there's a really good short film called Manhattan that I really has just been like a inspiration or influence. It's black and white film from 1926. I think the guy's name's Charles Strand, and it's obviously filmed around Manhattan, or of Manhattan at a certain period. It's on this thing that I came across, which is like cinematic history of the avant-garde. So it's got Man Ray documentaries on there, and like Marcel Duchamp. This one's quite conventional, so to speak. It's lots of big shots of skyscrapers noir in the sense of using black and white and shadows, lots of steam, manholes, but lots of shots of like, say, the Staten Island ferry, so a big ferry coming in with this like, and then just like this, hundreds of people pouring out into a city. So I kind of was like, they're the things that I sort of really wanted to capture. And then I was just like, well, that can be anywhere. But I think in terms of rather than just saying, oh, it's the city, really just concentrated into like these big cities. And then there's the other thing, which is, like if you're not, some people go, well, you should live there to write about it or something, or you should be from there to write about it. But, for me, let's take Los Angeles for it. It's so in popular culture. Now, like everyone has what Los Angeles is in their head already, so therefore it's already in people's it can be already in people's imagination. You can think about any movie, anything like that. You could sort of take that and write a version of Los Angeles yourself, because it's all there. You could watch 10 movies on Los Angeles and then you could write something about it. So I find that interesting. And I think, but to answer your question, really just to get me into the work as writing the work. But yeah, it's probably more fun for me to write them that way. And just, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I always kind of feel like there's an inherent criticism coming from you. And like you mentioned it with Belfie Hell, that there's lots of references to celebrities, but it's not necessarily like a lampooning of celebrities. It's just kind of like there. But it's not like it like makes me feel any better or anything. I'm not a huge fan of this place myself, but
there is that. I mean, I'm not sitting there sort of like trying to be like, I'm gonna outside looking in, criticizing it, or it's not it's not U2 or Bono or anything like that coming to America and sort of critiquing, but it's kind of like there is an element of that. I mean, to everyone, I think America is so writ large in the world that it's interesting that celebrities, Hollywood, LA, it's an interesting thing to look at, and it's real grist to sort of dive into as a bit of a topic as well. So, but probably less so. It's a topic, but it's sort of in the background as well. Like it's not the foreground of why I pick up. Well, want to write. Yeah.
And to that point, there is the post on Dennis Cooper's blog,
Yes,
Welcome to the World, METH-DTF, which is a really cool post, and has a quite exhaustive list of the songs referenced in the book and movies referenced in the book, and then a long list of further reading.
Yes.
And from following you on Instagram for a while, you have a sort of interesting taste in music. And I'm interested to hear kind of about how you choose what songs to reference, and just sort of like where your taste in music is at for those who don't follow you on Instagram.
Yeah. My partner would say, is it music that I listen to? But look, the songs. Okay, the blog post I sort of came from a position of like, how do I do one of those blog posts? And I sort of just went with like a scrapbook of sorts, like break it down. Here's some stuff that's because there are references, and that makes it an interesting blog post, I guess. There's songs referenced in there. There's a few movies, and then the flip side to that is, well, here's some stuff that's probably not evident in the book of what I was listening to or reading at the time, and similarly, and some music that I was listening to at the time of writing. Usually when for every book that I've written, I've sort of done a mixtape, which is songs that I was listening to at the time. So this time it's a little bit different because I specifically mentioned songs in the book, the songs playing on the radio. Well, oh God, I mean, like, I've got a whole bunch of music over there. I mean, my two big things at the moment are probably, like, I really love dub, and I really love something that I really got into over lockdown was lots of disco. So that comes through, or the disco part comes through in the book. A lot of those songs were written for something else. Like they were, there was a screenplay I was writing, and there were songs that were going to go in the screenplay. And I sort of didn't really go anywhere with it, and I just went, well, it's sort of similar character, so let's just put them into the book as well. So that came about through that. But I mean, I used to DJ a long time ago, and that was sort of how I earned. That was my job for a little bit, and had a little bit of a overnight graveyard shift on a radio show. So I sort of, and there was a period where I was like, I might be able to earn some money from writing. So I was trying to sort of like, I would be a very bad music journalist. And so, if you went and Googled, you could find that on the internet, like some very poor interviews. In fact, interviewed a lot of, for a while there, I was interviewing a lot of bands from Detroit, like Dirt Bombs, Bantam Rooster. I don't know if you know that band. Bands that pretty much circled around sort of the Dirt Bombs and then sort of subsequently White Stripes and things like that. Like someone messaged me a while ago. I forgot this happened. Someone messaged me and they were reading the White Stripes. There's a biography about the White Stripes, and I'm in there being quoted about the first time the White Stripes came to Australia. So which was like after they had one album, or they did two albums out on Sympathy of the Record Industry. And so I'm in there. So that's like a previous life. I'm in there, sort of being quoted. But yeah, all sorts of music. It's funny how, growing up, I probably would have been like, anything that sort of circulates around pop punk and post punk, really narrow. But like over lockdown, I suddenly developed a very strong affection for the band Yes, which and I find that funny because if someone had told my 16-year-old self that, my 16-year-old self would have probably used expletives and said, that band's disgusting, right? But now I'm a huge Yes fan for some reason. But yeah. So it's all over the place. Pretty much anything. I just went and bought 10 Waylon Jennings records. But I'll then put on some weird free jazz, something just to play out the cobwebs.
Yeah, that's a good palate cleanser. Yeah, I like. My dad listened to a lot of art rock type stuff when I was growing up. So I grew up around a lot of Yes and Genesis and Pink Floyd, that sort of thing. Got a soft spot in my heart for prog rock.
Yeah, I do as well. I think maybe Genesis might be a bridge too far for me. I've tried.
It depends. They have a lot of albums. I'm sure you could find something in there that you like.
Yeah.
But yeah, their early stuff is weird. I think it's even too weird for my dad sometimes.
I've got a friend who runs a record shop, and he's like insists that I'll like it, and I just think it's either. I think it's just so tied into their 80s stuff. So I'll put it on and I'll go, this is really good music. But then all of a sudden, like Phil Collins will come in doing backing vocals, and like it's Peter Gabriel's voice, and I just really can't disconnect, Sledgehammer and Sussudio from, my brain.
Yeah. The YouTube channel Trash Theory just did a video on Peter Gabriel, and it's so wild to me that he'll do a song about like Stephen Biko, and it's this really sort of like eclectic world music sort of thing, and then Sledgehammer is the same guy.
Yeah.
I don't know how one can have such a range, but he did. So
but then there's
go ahead.
But there's a band, I think it's called Brand X, which is like in the late 70s, is like Phil Collins is like sort of jazz fusion band. Terrible, but it's kind of like interesting to kind of go, he can go off and do this sort of interesting stuff and do interesting Genesis stuff. And then, just, I don't know, put out all that dire music that he put out in the 80s. But having said that, Easy Lover is an absolute corker of a song.
So, reeling myself back in to talk about the to talk about the book, because I've been on such a music kick lately. I would get too off topic, so I'm gonna reel myself back into the book. I think there's an interesting thing that you do where the narrator is much less specified at any given point in time than Samuel is. So the sort of my sell of the book to someone who hasn't read it yet would be that it's about a narrator and a person named Samuel, and they do this sort of like delirious shifting of the relationship changes, their like station in society changes, and it just kind of like floats around from being kind of like super destitute feeling to a little bit more opulent and back, and sort of like the first like 20% of the book I read in one sitting, and then went on a walk with my wife and was talking about how like, oh yeah, this is one of those books that's going to make me glad I don't drink anymore. Because it felt very much like that sort of like just brief spots of lucidity. And yeah, I think it's sort of interesting how the narrator is unnamed. I read one of the reviews that you reposted where like their gender is sort of unclear, or it shifts throughout the thing, and Samuel's sort of more of a solid figure, even if he does also sort of morph and change throughout the book. So yeah, I'm just kind of curious about the construction of the two main characters for you.
Yeah, I think you were interviewing someone recently, and you were talking about second person and the way that you sort of I think the conversation I got. I was driving at the time, so I might have got it completely wrong. But the conversation was sort of like how it can be read differently, in that you're putting yourself into that person, and being that person. So I think whilst it's the point of view is different, I think it's just to perhaps because I don't probably sit down with a bit of a preconceived thought about doing this, but I think the way that how it ends up is that it's to open that up and to have it a bit more in the sense of delirium. So it is a little bit what is actually happening, and and if it's unclear what's happening, then perhaps that's the thing that sort of makes people turn the page. And so that's the reason, is to sort of have it. And I think when we spoke last, I was talking about that thing of wanting to elicit a feeling in the person reading it as well, which is, like I said, sort of touches on delirium. And I think to do that, you need to be sort of skillful in the way that you're crafting the book. And I feel really bad because I just said the word crafting, but yeah, but putting it all together. So I think that's the reason why, is to sort of make it a bit unclear. That's part of the mystery of the actual story. So at the end, it's a little bit like, well, I get to the end and I don't know what happens, but I get to the end and I'm sort of a bit, just to have that possibility of entertainment for people as well. So it's to do that. It's to kind of go, well, where actually are we? I think that review you were talking about, at times it's also, it's about that review touched on something which is sort of what that stretching time as well. So it's stretching time, which is really that's quite easy to do in a book. But to stretch the actual perception of what's going on as well, and then which is a reflection of sort of how we think, right? So how we think is stretched and how we perceive things is stretched all the time. So I think it's just how to do that in a book, and I think that's just probably it really just then boils down to, well, that's the style of writing that I want to sort of do. So to sort of go through these different aspects of perception, whether it's that stretching of time. We can look at something from mental illness to things that are done to sort of make us feel a bit more deranged. You could look at something and it's you're seeing things not quite how they are as well. And I think that's interesting. I was curious about playing around with it's done really, I don't know if it's done really well, but the most probably obvious example of done it is in Rules of Attraction by Bret Easton Ellis, where it's not particularly, he writes, I think I haven't read that book in years, but my understanding of the book recollection was that it's different characters write a different chapter, but I was kind of interested in sort of perhaps is what is going on in METH-DTF, which is different characters write their perception of the same scene, and sort of I think that can all be done in the one character as well. There's sort of this is sort of what's going on, and there's different perspectives to it. There's different feelings. So it's just that was interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, it occurs to me that I think that one of the challenges in writing stories with characters is that we tend to want to make the characters' actions make sense, but I think people are a lot more inconsistent and unreliable than we might think, right? Like, you can just do something whacked out and completely out of character, out of nowhere, for like a reason that would be impossible to explain in a book.
And it's probably, like, I guess I get lumped in with, that catch-all phrase of experimental literature. And it's not that I'm sort of trying things deliberately, like I'm out here experimenting. I just guess it's like these things that are over here that are sort of a bit more traditional, well, I wouldn't say. I feel like the book's plot driven, but people would probably might say they're not. But I think they're plot driven because you've got a starting point and an end point, and how do you go from somewhere? So, but then like this sort of character development, and there's going to be a motivation, and there's going to be a conflict, and so the conflict is resolved, it ties it back to their motivation, and this sort of a story has to have three parts to it, and all this sort of stuff. It doesn't really interest me. So if it doesn't interest me, then I've got to come up with something else that sort of does interest me, and this is sort of the way I write. That's what interests me. So I guess to answer, I mean, it's not that there's no character development in there. It's just like it can jump as quickly as sort of we sort of think as well. And that thing, it's like stretching time, that really resonated with me. Someone saying something back to me, I was like, yeah, well, that's the thing. It's sort of there's an element of conceptually time travel there. Within moments as well.
Yeah, that's something that I really appreciate about writing is the time dilation that you can do with it. I remember back in college, somebody wrote a short story for a class that like on its face was just sort of like the thing a college kid would write. It was like two kids playing Russian roulette in the garage or something, but like the moments before the inevitable tragedy was like half of the text. And so like, time's moving really fast at either end of the story. And then in the middle, it's like a moment stretched out a couple hundred words. Which was,
So someone messaged me recently and asked a question. I got to get the question right, which is about the character in Belfie Hell. And the question was sort of like, am I wanting the writer... Sorry, am I wanting the reader to think that the characters are actually the people? Or are they the characters playing a version of themselves? I haven't done the question very, very good, but it was kind of like this question of like, I'm a bit confused. Like, there are all these celebrities in there, and are they playing themselves, or are they the real person, or are we putting something else onto them? And I sort of answered the question is that the characters are being controlled by like a sinister force, that's controlling the riot and things like this. So it didn't really, it's interesting that was their perception of the book, which is, I'm like, well, at the end of the day, it's really your perception of the book, right? Like what you get out of it is what you get out of it. That's not really a question for me to sort of go, well, this is exactly how it is. It's in this space over here, and it operates in a space over here, and it's what you understand it to be, really.
Yeah, there's part of me that wants to snark at certain corners of YouTube and be like, it would be interesting to see the like, here's what House of Leaves really means, people get a hold of this book, and try to like try to nail down what's happening, right? Because I mean, like, you tell us what happens. I'm trying to break myself out of this space of like completely accepting the text as like non-metaphorical, right? Like, I'm so into this like surrealist sort of thing where it's just like, no, I'm going to accept that like they're in Columbus, Ohio, and now they're back in Los Angeles, and they're in love, and now they're not in love, and
well, it's the beauty of The Shining is a really good example of that, the movie, which is like, no one really knows what it's about, right? I mean, on one level, it's about a bunch of people in a hotel. Are they haunted by ghosts? Are they not? Is it like is he a ghost? And then there's that documentary where everyone's done this sort of critical theory thinking of it, and none of that is true, right? It's probably not true, but like, there's all this stuff in there that people are like, there's all this stuff in here, and people are just constantly talking about it. And I just that's really interesting, which is like, I don't know if probably Stanley Kubrick was trying to do any of that stuff that sort of people have read into it. It's just, so I find that stuff, that interesting.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting because there's so much analysis of the movie, but not a lot of analysis of like Stanley Kubrick as a person.
You don't know much about him.
Right. Like, did he spend a lot of time with Native American people and become like quite extra sympathetic to their plight? And so he decided to do set design things.
Oh, I forgot that was one of the, that's one of the theories, yeah.
But
but then there's some like the space, like it's, my favorite one about that is all the clues about the moon landing, right? And it's like, is that in there or is it just coincidence? It's like chance, so there's a lot. So, I mean, there's a lot in my stuff that just comes out because it's chance, right? And I think just let it be, right? Yeah.
For sure. I think that's one of my favorite things about so-called experimental or avant-garde art is that the element of control that the artist has over the piece is loosened. Their grip is loosened over the piece a lot more than, like one of the great masters of oil painting is like putting everything in there deliberately. Like our group of writers tend to sort of see what happens. And I think that just makes it so much more exciting. Like maybe on my worst days, I think that I'm just being lazy by doing something like that. But I also like to think about the book as something alive that like really does change the more I read it or after I've read other things, and not just so much in like, oh, I learned more about 18th century France, so now I can understand Flaubert a little bit better.
I just couldn't write something like that. I just couldn't have any, and that's not to say that that's not, I'm not, when I say I couldn't write something like that, I really mean it. It's not like, I don't sit around and go, well, something that's sort of middle of the road, and that's a judgment call, but middle of the road, heavily researched, heavily mapped out, there's treatments on each character and all that sort of stuff. I just couldn't do it. I just would be, I'd be bored as an author, and so I just want to do something that's a bit more, for me, we're dynamic, and we're talking about writing about the cities before. I just couldn't write a novel in that way. I also I just don't have the time to do that. I just don't want to. So I'm kind of like, this is how and I've tried, and I just couldn't do it. I was, it's just, I guess, sometimes you listen to some podcasts and they're like, have you got any advice for writers and all this sort of stuff? It's just like, well, you just got to find your style. I think your style comes about from, clearly what works for you to write. And I think, so some of the stuff you're asking about is clearly just a byproduct really of how can I actually write? And that's the end. That's the end. The end product there is, and that stretching of time and perceptions changing, and then perceptions in a reader changing. People's sexuality is like what we don't know quite what's happening here, or it has changed, or it's jumping back and forth and things like that. And some things are fleshed out, and some things aren't. And like you said, it goes from motels to sort of like some high living, and then back again, and it all stops in between. It's just that's just come about from what keeps me sort of entertained. To tap away on the keyboard.